There is a specific kind of silence that only exists during a storm. It's a heavy, suffocating quiet that tells you you are not alone. Most people think their front door is a barrier, a shield between them and the world. They think a deadbolt is enough to keep the darkness out. But tonight, I'm going to show you how wrong that assumption can be. From a rain-soaked doorstep in Seattle, where a stranger's smile hides a predator's heart, to the deep, ancient shadows of the Appalachian Trail, where something has been mimicking the voices of hikers for decades. These are not just stories, they are warnings from people who barely escaped with their lives. Stay with me until the very end, because by the time this video is over, you won't just be checking your locks. You'll be wondering if the person standing on the other side of that door is even human at all. It was a Sunday night in late November in Seattle, the kind of night where the rain doesn't just fall. It crashes against the earth with a violent, relentless intensity. The local news had been issuing weather alerts about an atmospheric river all week, and by 9 p.m., the storm had finally hit with full force. The wind was so aggressive it made the old maple tree in my front yard claw at the siding of the house like a living thing, creating a rhythmic scratching sound that made my skin crawl. Outside, the streetlights flickered and groaned, casting long, distorted shadows against the sheets of gray water that flooded the gutters. It was the perfect night to stay inside, lock every door, and assume that no sane person would be out in that chaos. I was in the kitchen making tea, trying to drown out the howling wind with a true crime podcast playing low on my phone. The steam from the kettle rose in the dim light, and for a moment, everything felt safe, warm, and perfectly normal. But in an instant, that feeling of security vanished. A heavy, dull thud hit my front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It sounded like someone had lost their balance and slammed their entire body weight against the wood. I froze, the kettle whistling sharply in the background, my heart leaping into my throat. I stood perfectly still, clutching the counter, waiting, hoping it was just a fallen branch or the wind playing tricks on my mind. Then came a faint, rhythmic rattling, the distinct metallic sound of someone testing the handle of my storm door, slowly and deliberately. I walked to the foyer, my footsteps silent on the rug, and leaned into the cold surface of the door to look through the peephole. I could see him. A man was standing on the top step, soaked to the bone, his jacket clinging to his thin frame, and dark hair matted across his forehead. He didn't have an umbrella or a hood. He kept glancing nervously over his shoulder at the empty, dark street, looking like a man who was being hunted by something invisible in the rain. He leaned closer to the door, his pale face filling the entire peephole view. "My phone died," he said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Please, I just need to come inside for a minute to charge it. I'm stranded, and I have no one to call." Something deep in my gut turned cold. His voice was too calm, too rehearsed for someone who was supposedly in distress. I didn't reach for the lock. Instead, I spoke through the thick wood, telling him I could call the police for him. The moment I mentioned the word police, his entire demeanor shifted instantly. The pleading look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, dead stare that made the hair on my arms stand up. He blinked slowly. Then he reached down and wrapped his hand around the handle. He started to twist it violently. The metal squealed under the strain. I watched the deadbolt flex against the frame once, twice, harder. He leaned his head against the wood and whispered in a raspy tone, "I know, you're alone in there. I can see your shadow on the floor." I backed away, stumbling into the hallway, grabbing my phone to call 911 with shaking fingers. As I talked to the dispatcher, my voice cracking with fear, I pulled up my Ring camera feed on my phone. He wasn't on the porch anymore. He was moving toward the dark side of the house, holding an old cardboard box over his head to shield his face from the night vision sensors. I heard the distinct metallic click of my backyard gate. He was in. Suddenly, the power flickered once, then died, plunging the house into a terrifying total darkness. The only sound was the rain hammering the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. I stood in my kitchen, clutching a kitchen knife in one hand, listening to his footsteps scraping against the siding of the house, coming closer and closer. Then came the sound that finally broke my spirit. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks on the kitchen window, right behind my head. I pulled back the blinds just an inch, and there he was, staring through the glass with a wide, empty smile that looked like a jagged scar. He wasn't a victim of the storm. He was the predator using the storm as his cover. By the time the blue and red lights of the police cruisers reflected off the rain, he had vanished. They found a pair of heavy-duty zip ties dropped near my back door, and a set of fresh footprints that led directly into the thick, dark woods behind my property. They never caught him. Now, every time it rains in Seattle, I don't just lock my doors. I push the heavy dresser in front of them. I sit in the dark, and I wait, because I know he's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next house to go dark. We all want to believe our homes are sanctuaries, but as we just saw, a locked door is only as strong as the person standing behind it. This next story takes us away from the city and into the deep silence of the woods. They say that the most dangerous predators aren't the ones you meet by chance in a dark alley. They are the ones who have been studying you for years. For me, that nightmare began in college. It wasn't the kind of bullying you see in movies. It was something much darker. A slow, calculated campaign of psychological warfare led by 2 brothers. They were older, wealthier, and they seemed to take a sick, twisted pleasure in making me feel small. They didn't just use insults. They used my identity, my background, and my very presence on campus as a target. I spent 4 long years looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next joke that felt more like a death threat. I thought graduating and moving 3 states away would finally end that chapter of my life. I found a small, quiet house in a suburb where neighbors barely knew each other's names. For 2 years, I lived in peace. But as it turns out, some people don't just move on, they wait. It started with small, subtle things. A chair moved on my porch, a single cigarette butt left on my driveway, even though I don't smoke. Then came the phone calls at 3 a.m., heavy breathing followed by the sound of someone laughing. A dry, metallic laugh I recognized from the cold hallways of my university. One Friday night, the escalation reached its terrifying breaking point. I was in my home office finishing some work, the house silent except for the hum of my computer. Then, the tapping started. It was sharp, rhythmic, coming from the window directly behind my chair. When I turned around, I didn't see a human face. I saw a clown mask. It was a grotesque, distorted thing with a painted-on grin that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. the red paint looking like dried, crusty blood under the pale glow of the streetlights. The eyes behind the mask were hollow, dark, staring straight into mine with a terrifying familiarity. I froze, the air leaving my lungs in a cold rush. I didn't have to guess who it was. I knew. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone. But before I could dial for help, a second figure emerged from the deep shadows of the oak tree in my yard. He was taller, broader, and wearing the exact same mask. They stood there in total, haunting silence, just watching me through the glass, their heads tilted in unison as if they were admiring a piece of prey. It wasn't just a prank. It was a demonstration of power. They wanted me to know that no matter how far I ran, they could still find me. I screamed for my parents, who were staying with me for the weekend. The moment my father yanked the blinds up, the figures didn't run. They stepped back slowly. They walked into the darkness with a chilling, unnatural calmness. They vanished before the front door could even be opened. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but the yard was empty. All they found were deep, deliberate footprints in the soft mud beneath my window, and a single grainy Polaroid photo left on my porch. It was a photo of me, taken through my living room window exactly 2 weeks prior. The police questioned the brothers the next day, but they had perfect alibis provided by their wealthy, influential family. There was no physical proof, no DNA, nothing to tie them to those horrific masks. The case was closed before it even began. After that night, the calls stopped. The shadows moved on. But that silence is almost worse than the harassment. Every time I walk past a window at night or hear a faint accidental tap against the glass, I wonder if they're still out there in the dark, wearing those painted grins, just waiting for me to forget so they can remind me that they are still watching. The past has a way of catching up to us, no matter how fast we run. But what happens when the danger isn't someone you know, but something you can't even explain? If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep the lights on and the monsters out. Now, let's get back to the darkness. 6 months after I received my honorable discharge from the Army, I realized that the silence of civilian life was louder than any explosion I had heard during my 3 tours overseas. 8 years of active duty had rewired my brain to always look for threats, to listen for the snap of a twig, and to never truly sleep with both eyes closed. I thought the best way to quiet the noise in my head was to surround myself with the absolute stillness of nature. So I packed my tactical ruck and headed for a remote, unnamed section of the Appalachian Trail in Virginia. I wasn't looking for a social hike. I was looking for a place where the only thing I had to worry about was the weather. Or so I thought. The first few days were exactly what I needed. The air was thin and cool. The forest was lush. And for a moment, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a decade. But on the 4th day, deep in a section of the mountains that felt untouched by modern man, that old combat instinct, the one that kept me alive in the desert, started screaming in the back of my skull. It started as a faint pressure at the base of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of a predator's gaze. I stopped by a rocky stream to refill my water, and that's when I heard it, the light, rhythmic crunch of dead leaves directly behind me. I turned my head slowly, scanning the thick brush with practiced eyes. The trail was empty. No hikers, no bears, just the swaying skeletal shadows of the ancient oaks. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself I was just suffering from hypervigilance, a ghost of my past life. But as I kept moving, the footsteps followed. It wasn't the random heavy noise of an animal. These footsteps were matching my pace with haunting precision. When I sped up, the rustling in the bushes accelerated. When I stopped to adjust my gear, the forest went deathly silent a split second later, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Whatever was out there wasn't just passing through, it was stalking me, staying just out of sight in the dense gray undergrowth. I reached a small, isolated hiker's cabin just as the sun began to vanish behind the ridge, plunging the valley into a bruised purple twilight. I didn't waste a second. I slipped inside, slammed the heavy oak door, and threw the iron deadbolt into place. I stood there in the pitch black, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, waiting for my breathing to slow down. I told myself that once the darkness truly fell, whatever was trailing me would move on to easier prey. I was wrong. Sometime around 3:14 a.m., I snapped awake. The cabin was freezing, the fire had died down to gray ash, and the usual night sounds of crickets and wind had vanished into a terrifying void of silence. Then, I heard it, the slow, deliberate crunch of gravel directly outside the thin glass of the window near my bunk. I didn't move a single muscle. I reached out slowly, silently, for my rifle, the cold steel feeling like the only honest thing left of the world. Through a small tear in the curtains, the moonlight revealed a shape. It was tall, hooded, and standing perfectly still. It wasn't trying to break in. It was just standing there, inches from the glass, staring into the dark cabin with a terrifying, motionless intensity. I rolled out of bed. I stayed low to the floor. I reached for the door and yanked it open with a roar. The loud, mechanical clack of the rifle bolt echoed through the trees like a gunshot. The figure didn't scream. It didn't speak. It just turned and sprinted toward the tree line with a speed that no human should possess. I fired 2 warning shots into the freezing night air, the flashes briefly illuminating the twisted branches, but the forest had already swallowed the intruder whole. I sat by that door until the first light of dawn. When the sun finally rose, I found the footprints. They were large, barefoot, and deep enough to suggest an incredible weight. They didn't lead back to any trail. They led straight into the thickest, most impassable part of the mountain where no man could survive. I hiked 12 miles back to my truck without stopping once. I still love the outdoors, but I never go deep into the woods without a clear line of sight anymore. Because I know that out there, in the parts of the map that remain gray and unnamed, something is still waiting, still watching, and still practicing the sound of my footsteps, waiting for me to return. The night is long, and as we've seen tonight, the darkness holds secrets that are best left undisturbed. Whether it's a stranger at your door or a shadow in the woods, remember that your instincts are your only true weapon. Never ignore that feeling at the base of your neck. Which of these encounters chilled you the most? Was it the smiling stranger in the Seattle rain, or the silent barefoot watcher in the Appalachian woods? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm curious to know if you've ever felt a pair of eyes on you when you thought you were alone. If you have a true story of your own, something you can't explain, something that still keeps you awake at night, send it to the email in the description. Your experience could be the next one we feature here in the darkness. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss another entry in these diaries. It helps us keep the lights on and the monsters at bay. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your windows barred, and stay safe. Good night.